آزادی بیان
言论自由
free speech.
Now, you've heard the whole day some terrific plugs for lots of amazing new platforms. So I'm going to start with the greatest platform in the history of free speech, which is, of course, that one. That is the original platform in Athens where the speakers to the assembly in 5th century BC Athens would speak, where democracy was invented. And it is, in a way, the ideal type of the free speech we need for democracy. People would walk, citizens of ancient Athens would walk for hours across the hills to get to the platform. They'd all gather there. The herald would say, who will address the assembly? And any adult citizen could speak. They heard all the evidence, they heard all the facts, they heard all the arguments for and against. Should we fight the Persians on land or by sea? And they decided to fight the Persians on sea after a vote, and that's how the world's first democracy saved democracy. That is, in a way, the ideal type for free speech, for democracy. Now, of course, these days we can't all get together in one place, so we have media. It's the media we need for democratic self-government. How do we need these media to be for democracy? Well, I've been working on a project, as Barbara mentioned, on free speech for the last 10 years. There's the book, available in all good Amazons, and also downstairs where I can sign it for you, end of commercial. There's the website we have developed at Oxford in 13 languages on free speech, and as a result of this product, which, as I say, has taken us 10 years, taken us around the world, talking to people from all over the world about their views of free speech, we have developed these 10 very simple, stripped down to essentials, principles for free speech, for debate, for a connected world, norms for a connected world. There they are in multiple languages. You can find them on the site in your own. And there's the principle on journalism. We require uncensored, diverse, trustworthy media so we can make well-informed decisions and participate fully in political life. Now, you may say, particularly at the end of the long day, motherhood and apple pie. But actually, this is very, very carefully honed, stripped down to essentials. Each word is carefully chosen. Uncensored, diverse, trustworthy. Very quickly, just to run through those. These, of course, describe not just the legal framework, but the whole news ecosystem. First of all, uncensored. Still a lot of it about. China today has, we just heard about it, probably the largest apparatus of human censorship in history. But for the most part these days, censorship is done not directly by people called censors, but through ownership. So if you look at a country like Turkey, which certainly doesn't have free media anymore, here's a piece we have up, why Turkey's mainstream media preferred penguins to protests. So during the Gezi Park protests, some of you will know, really important event in the history of Turkey, CNN Turk was broadcasting a documentary about penguins. And the other main channels were doing something similar. Why? Well, very simple, because the owners of these media have multiple other interests. They have to get advertising from the state. They depend on getting contracts from Erdogan, so they weren't going to blot their copybook too much. Wherever you go in the world, and you can search our content by country, Hungary, many other places, wherever you click almost, you'll find the problem of ownership. Either the political power exercising control through ownership of media, or what we have in Britain, which is the other way round, Rupert Murdoch telling proprietors what to do. This is why the diverse is so important. It's diversity of ownership, diversity of political orientation, diversity of ideology, diversity of mediums and genres, diversity of representation, that every significant group in the society is represented in the media or by the media. And last but not least, trustworthy. I was very interested that Ben Smith of BuzzFeed singled out that word trust. So in my view, and as someone who's worked as a journalist for the years, this is the key point. It's not about objectivity. Nobody is objective. That's a myth. In public service broadcasting, it may be about due impartiality, but the essential point is that there's a relationship of trust between you, the journalist, and your readers, viewers, or users. That can be a very different contract. Jon Snow, on the Daily Show, had a contract with his viewers, right? It wasn't a BBC contract, but there was a relationship of trust. George Orwell, probably the greatest journalist of the 20th century, in a fantastic book, Homage to Catalonia, I think one of the finest books of political writing that exists, says at the end of the book, distrust what I've just told you. It reflects my political prejudices, my particular point of view. I didn't see the whole scene. He says, I was very partial. Don't believe me. And so we believe him. When I was writing about dissidents in Eastern Europe, I was absolutely clear where my sympathies lay. They lay with the dissidents. That's also a contract with the reader. Ryszard Kapuscinski, someone I used hugely to admire, it turns out he'd broken his contract with the reader because he told us it was fact, it was reportage, but actually he'd made it up or he'd taken other people's stories. So, uncensored, diverse, trustworthy. Now this takes me to the question, are we losing the media we need for democracy? First thing to say is, there never was a golden age. There never is a golden age. That period when Walter Cronkite used to end the TV news, and that's the way it is, was not a golden age. There weren't many sources of news or indeed views. What's happened with the internet and now the smartphone altogether is that the opportunities have become much bigger, but so have the risks. The upside and the downside have just been magnified enormously. The upside, there's much more information. You can directly engage as a citizen in the conversation, like someone on the PNICs. You can participate, you can sign an e-partition. A like on Facebook is a form of political participation. You can see people directly on YouTube. Fact-checking. People talk so much about fake news. Fact-checking has become much, much easier because of the internet. Actually, on Twitter, for example, there I am on Twitter, I once posted a piece of fake news, by mistake, I hasten to add. Within 2 minutes, 3 people had called me out on it. Twitter is brilliant in that respect, and diversity, too. Many more diverse voices can be heard directly through the internet. In India, you see this as, for example, there's an operation called Dalit Camera, which is about bringing you the voices and faces of the Dalit, formerly called the Untouchables, directly to screen. So there's a huge, huge plus. But let me now go to the downside, to the minus, to the risks. And I would say they are, first of all, that the effect of the internet and smartphone on our media is at one and the same time massive fragmentation and massive concentration. And both those things are a problem. So fragmentation, simply because the internet offers an infinity of outlets, a near infinity of outlets, people are in different places across the board. And the question is, does this produce the famous echo chamber and filter bubble effects? Now, this is still a question out there. Many people assume the question is answered. In a way, the answer is we don't know. So Reuters Institute, their fantastic digital news report, actually quite skeptical about the proposition. They actually were suggesting that in many respects we have more diverse, particularly in distributed media and search, more diverse news. It's not the echo chamber. On the other hand, if you go to another colleague of ours at Oxford, Jonathan Bright at the Oxford Internet Institute, he's done a great study using Twitter's data, Twitter's open API, which makes, I think, a compelling case that it depends who you are. If you're broadly speaking in the center, the broad center of politics, actually you have more diverse sources of news and views and you go looking for them. if you're at the political extremes, there's a very powerful echo chamber effect, and it's at the extremes that prejudices are reinforced in the echo chamber. And I think he demonstrates that very powerful. Now, of course, in some countries, the extremes are very narrow, like in Germany. In some countries, the extreme goes much more into the center, particularly if you have primaries, as in the US, and so you get polarization. But that study is based on Twitter. What about this giant Facebook, which we've all been talking about for the whole of today? We don't know, because Facebook has not yet given us the data on which we could find out. They've done studies from their own data science team, which suggest it ain't necessarily so. One study said that 1/3 of the content, political content people looked at on Facebook was from contrary views. But that's all we know, and I think it's actually not good enough. When Campbell Brown comes to speak to you tomorrow, maybe one of you could ask her the question, can't we have sufficient data so we can make a reasonable judgment on this incredibly important point for democracy? Not all the data, of course, that we wouldn't expect that, but sufficient data. This brings me to the question of concentration. And when we say concentration, we think, of course, of Facebook in particular, saying which I have, of course, lost the wonderful graph I was about to show you, but I'll find you in a minute, which shows, oh, I can get back to the center page actually, which shows you that Facebook is the empire on which the sun never sets. That is the graph of the map of the leading social network by countries. Now, if you go back to 2009, you see it's a very heterogeneous picture. 2014, the map of the world is painted blue, and 2017, it's still mainly painted blue. One thing that has happened, it is not new that news is supplied to us by private means. That's what most newspapers were. A.J. Liebling, the famous writer on the press, said the function of a newspaper is to inform, but its role is to make money. What's new is that this is being done on a global scale. 1.9 billion going on 2 billion regular monthly users, and in effect we have a privately owned global public sphere. And that's something we've never had before. Mark Zuckerberg has written his wonderful undergraduate essay, which many of you will know, 6,000 words. I'm not sure what sort of a mark I'd have given it if it had come to me as an undergraduate essay. But what's important about it is it acknowledges that Facebook has a public responsibility, a social responsibility. But Emily Bell, whose wonderful study I commend to all of you called The Platform Press, says, while Zuckerberg frames the global expansion of Facebook in idealized civic terms, what is being offered is a closed system where information is atomized, automatically distributed, and in which the behaviors of users are captured and monetized. That's a challenge. I'm not saying that's necessarily 100% right, but it's a challenge I think Facebook have to answer. Let me say at once, I think the wrong way to go about this is the path that Germany is taking just at the moment, which is, as you know, to pass what they're calling the Facebook law, to give it its catchy German name, the Netzwerkdurchsetzungsgesetz. That's a great one to catch on, which is to try and do this by legislation. We can talk about that in discussion. I think it's massively problematic. I think actually we need to engage, as you're doing here at this meeting, with Facebook, with Twitter, with Google, but there is a question of monopoly or near monopoly. And this brings me to the commercial impact of the internet, which is the next big point. As you all know, the impact, and you've been talking about it all day, on so-called legacy media is that while there are great exceptions, many, many newspapers are drowning. What do you do when you're drowning? You wave and you shout as loud as you can. And that's what more and more newspapers who are drowning is doing. They're waving and they're shouting. If it bleeds, it leads. If it roars, it scores, a tyranny of the clickstream, more sensationalism, more dumbing down, less serious investigative content, because that's difficult, gets less clicks, and is expensive. You know, on the Guardian famously on its comment is free website quotes C.P. Scott, comment is free but facts are sacred, the famous motto. We now say comment is free but facts are expensive. It costs. The sensationalism comes also, I mean, I've been writing a column for The Guardian for 15 years. It's very interesting to see how over that period, as we've gone online, as people have been looking so closely at the clickstream, that's fantastic. When a column does well, it's 250,000 readers. That's amazing. But the way in which the pressure is on to make the headline as sensational as possible. When I come off the platform this evening, I will be talking to my editor of The Guardian on a column on Brexit, and we'll be having this conversation. I actually have in my contract a provision which says that I have the final say over headline and stand first. And that's amazing, because the temptation is always to make it that bit more sensational. You know, let's bomb Ukraine, because that'll bring the readers to the website and then maybe give you a few crumbs of digital advertising from Facebook and Google's table. In short, the proposition we need to discuss is that if in the classic American First Amendment tradition we talk of the marketplace of ideas, what we have here is perhaps a market failure in the marketplace of ideas. A market failure in the marketplace of ideas. Now, I'm not too pessimistic about this. Many newspapers are surviving, foundation-supported journalism, public service broadcasting where you have it, aggregation and curation sites, citizen journalism, and yes, Vice and BuzzFeed. You know, I have to say, and it's not just because Ben Smith is here, you know, I suddenly started finding fantastic pieces of really good reportage written by reporters on Vice and BuzzFeed, doing stuff from eastern Ukraine that mainstream media were not doing. So I'm not fatalistic about it, but it's certainly a challenge. Last but not least, everyone talks about fake news. I actually think this doesn't describe the essential nature of the challenge we face. It is true that there is much more potential for disinformation and misinformation as a result of the ecosystem we have at the moment, partly for money, the famous Macedonian meme farms, politically in two forms. Firstly, foreign powers intervening. Putin's Russia takes the gold medal for misinformation and disinformation because they set out very systematically to work out how you would do this. And then, of course, domestically, disinformation pushed out by domestic actors, like, for example, the micro-targeting done by the Trump campaign in 2016, using Facebook particularly well, using the dark posts. Here's this interesting graph showing that at the peak of the American election, actually fake news stories were growing viral and being engaged with more than true news stories. But actually, I would put it to you that the biggest problem we face is not fake news, but Fox News. It was Fox News, not fake news, that essentially won the election for Trump. And when I say Fox News, I mean in the broadest sense Fox News. And this is my last point, and then let's go back, let's open it up for discussion. So if we go back to the PNIX, to the platform in ancient Athens, where free speech for democracy was discovered, what you also had there was, forgive the slightly portentous term, the epistemology of democracy. The epistemology of democracy said, we agree that there are things called facts. We agree that there's evidence. We agree that there are logical, rational arguments. Greek philosophy was on at that at the same time. We may disagree very strongly about what's the right argument and what's the right conclusion, but we basically agree on the facts and how we should argue about them. Now, in the world of populism in the broadest sense, of alternative facts, this basic epistemological proposition is put in question. Great example, Donald Trump says Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. Barack Obama thereupon publishes his birth certificate. End of story, you and I might think. Not a bit of it. Donald Trump says, I savor this quotation, many people feel that it wasn't a proper certificate. Think about that. It's not just many people think, it's many people feel. I may think this jacket is blue, but you feel it's pink, right? And your feeling, your emotion, trumps the evidence. And actually, by some polls, 30 to 40% of Americans still say they're not sure Barack Obama was born in the United States. So the real challenge, in my view, is not so much fake news as such, as these powerful, emotionally appealing, simplistic nationalist narratives. Make America great again. Bring back control to Brexit Britain. On est chez nous in Marine Le Pen. These simple, emotionally appealing narratives. And the challenge is, how do you get into the echo chambers of populism and reach people who not only haven't heard the evidence, haven't heard our stories, but don't even particularly want to, because they'd rather have the warming solidarity of shared indignation. Now, we've talked most of today about the business of journalism and the technology of journalism. But I want to say this is, above all in my book, a challenge to the craft of journalism. Because let's not forget, journalism is also a great craft. And what we need, if I were 40 years younger, I would be trying to work out how to bring good evidence-based stories into the echo chambers of the populists, so they actually break through to the people who voted for Trump or for Brexit or for Kaczynski or for Le Pen. If there's a new George Orwell in the room, there's the challenge. Write the new Animal Farm about Donald Trump, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, and Marine Le Pen. Thank you very much.
آزادی بیان،
言论自由
free speech